A janitor with no degree and no reputation walks into a top tech company and makes everyone rethink their assumptions. He doesn't just fix a 100 AI error, he changes his life and the lives of those around him. But can an unknown man truly become a hero in a world filled with power and ambition? And can love blossom in such a high-stakes environment? Follow this inspiring story of perseverance, transformation, and an unexpected love story between two people who seem worlds apart. Don't miss it. Tom Mitchell, a single father, entered Titan AI just as the sun had set, with the golden lights reflecting off the skyscraper's glass walls. Though it was one of the world's leading tech companies, where the brightest minds were pioneering breakthroughs in AI, Tom was just a nighttime janitor. But for him, this job wasn't just a job, it was the way he provided for Emily, his young daughter. Tom had once been an outstanding student at MIT, a prestigious university. But a tragic event changed everything. His wife died in a car accident, leaving him and Emily to face a challenging life ahead. With no other choice but to drop out, Tom returned to his hometown and took a janitorial job at Titan AI, the company he once dreamed of working for. But now he was just a small, invisible part of the company's massive operation. Despite all the hardships, Tom never lost faith in a better future for his daughter. Emily, his 6-year-old girl, was the only reason he kept going. She always looked at him with trusting eyes, and sometimes when Tom felt his lowest, it was Emily's gaze that gave him the strength to continue. Emily Mitchell was not just Tom's daughter, but also a little friend, always making simple but meaningful gifts for her father. Every morning as Tom took Emily to school, she would draw innocent pictures for him, often featuring the two of them, and occasionally a sketch of a mysterious woman. She called her the great mother she'd never met. These drawings were not only Tom's joy, but also his motivation to fight through life's struggles. Tom lived in a small apartment with faded walls and old furniture, but he never felt like he lacked anything. Emily made everything meaningful. A simple bed, an old table set, and a small desk for Emily to draw, that was all they needed. The apartment felt like a castle to them because in it, they had each other. And to Tom, that was everything. Titan AI was no ordinary company. It was home to some of the brightest minds in the tech industry. Its employees weren't people you could easily overlook. They were hand-picked from top universities working on groundbreaking projects that could change the world. But Tom, the man who cleaned the floors and replaced the burnt-out light bulbs, never imagined that in the quiet of the late hours when everyone else had gone home, he might be the one to change the fate of Titan AI. Isabella Reynolds, the CEO of Titan AI, was a cold and decisive woman. She never let anyone see her emotions. As the founder and leader of the company, Isabella had transformed Titan AI from a small company into a tech giant. With sharp eyes and exceptional analytical skills, she knew exactly what was happening in her company. However, loneliness was always her companion. The company and her work were everything to her, but sometimes she wondered if anyone truly understood the sacrifices she'd made. Isabella never believed in hype or illusions. She was a pragmatist, never allowing personal emotions to influence her work. This made her a strong leader, but it also led to frequent bouts of loneliness in the very company she had built. The project Titan AI was currently facing was a tough one. A new algorithm that, if successful, would secure a massive international contract. But things were going awry, and Isabella felt like she was losing control. That night, as everyone left the office, Tom continued working. He wasn't just cleaning. He sometimes stopped to look at the AI research the Titan engineers were working on. One night, as he passed by the large conference room, he happened to glance at the whiteboard where the engineers were trying to solve a problem they couldn't crack. Part of him found it amusing because everything they were doing seemed like just pushing numbers around on the board without truly understanding the essence of the problem. He stood there staring at the model on the board. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. He realized they were using a linear model for a non-linear problem, which was wrong. Tom decided to change the way they viewed the problem. He grabbed a red pen, erased some parts, and rewrote the model in a simpler yet more logical way. He didn't think much about it. It just felt like something wasn't right, and he fixed it. But with a few simple changes, the result was noticeably different. Tom quietly walked out of the conference room as if nothing had happened. But inside, a spark of hope ignited. This was the moment Tom Mitchell's life began to change. The entire Titan AI company was like a massive clock, with each gear moving in harmony and precision. But that night, beneath the lights of the workrooms, the clock began to show cracks. Isabella Reynolds stood before a control panel, her eyes fixed on the screen with numbers dancing lines of code repeating, yet nothing was changing. "This can't be happening," Isabella whispered, her voice cold but filled with tension. 4 days, millions of dollars, and we have nothing. Top AI experts and engineers from the company were present in the meeting room, their eyes scanning the jumbled data, the errors they couldn't resolve. Jason Marlowe, Titan's lead engineer, was a rare person who rarely showed signs of failure. But tonight, he stood there, his hand stroking his tie, as if trying to hold himself together. He knew he was the best in the team, yet the silence made him feel powerless. Isabella turned her gaze, piercing each person in the room. Everyone lowered their heads, not daring to speak a word. "We don't have time," she said coldly. "The company is waiting. This contract could determine our fate. If we don't solve this by tonight, I will leave this room without any further explanation." Jason looked at his colleagues, then back at the control panel. This project was too big, too important. He couldn't let this failure damage his reputation, but desperation was evident on his face. The room was silent, only the clacking of keyboards and the whirring of computers calculating filled the air. While the team continued tirelessly searching for a solution, Tom Mitchell, the janitor, was going about his usual duties. His footsteps were light, almost invisible in the vast space of the company. Suddenly, he stopped in front of the meeting room, where tables were filled with papers, tools, and whiteboards covered with complicated formulas. Tom wasn't a tech enthusiast. He was just an ordinary janitor, but after years of working here, he had become familiar with the company's atmosphere, with the lines of code, and the formulas the engineers created. Part of him felt proud to be working in such a place, even though his role was merely cleaning floors and tidying up. Then he looked at the whiteboard where Jason and the engineers were drawing a complex computational model. The numbers and formulas on the board appeared to be theoretically correct, but to Tom, something didn't sit right. "They're doing it wrong," Tom thought to himself. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and approached the whiteboard. He didn't think too much, just followed a natural instinct. With a red pen in hand, he began to redraw the model differently. He changed how the data was being used rather than applying a linear model. Like everyone else, he used a simpler yet more logical, non-linear model. Tom wasn't an expert, but his subtle perspective surpassed that of Titan's top engineers. He didn't need complex theories. He just relied on intuition. With a few simple changes, he stepped back and observed. A strange feeling rose in him. "Maybe I got it right," he thought. But he didn't stop. He simply left the room with an unusually calm feeling inside. Hours later, Isabella walked into the meeting room, finding all her engineers still busy with the control panel, making no progress. Jason was still seated, his head down, eyes glued to the screen. "What's going on?" Isabella said, her voice cold and decisive. Jason looked up, exhaustion clearly written on his face. "We're having trouble with the algorithm, but there's nothing more we can do. The whole team has been working for 3 days, and you still have nothing." Isabella stepped closer to the whiteboard, her gaze fixed on the complex formulas. At that moment, she noticed something odd. A portion of the formula had been erased, but it hadn't been done by anyone on the team. It had been erased and replaced with a new, simpler, more logical model. No one in the room understood the change. Not even Jason, the lead engineer, noticed the difference. "Who did this?" Isabella asked, her voice stern. Suddenly, the door opened. Tom Mitchell appeared, broom in hand. He lowered his head, not daring to speak, but he knew that Isabella's eyes had noticed the change in the model. "This," Isabella said, turning to look at Tom. "This is yours, isn't it?" Tom nodded slightly, feeling embarrassed. "Yes, I just saw something wasn't right, so I tried changing it." Isabella was silent for a moment before pulling out her tablet and re-entering the data with the model Tom had just altered. Within 8 seconds, the numbers on the screen skyrocketed. "Accuracy has increased by 18.4%, she said, her voice emotionless. "Error rate reduced by over 60%. The room fell silent. No one dared speak. Jason looked at Tom, his eyes wide, unable to believe what had just happened. He was the first to realize he had been wrong. He was the best on the team, but now Tom, a janitor, had done what Jason couldn't. Isabella turned to look at Tom, her gaze no longer cold. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tom Mitchell, janitor." Isabella was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. "Tomorrow you'll attend the strategy meeting. Don't refuse." Tom was shocked. He was just a janitor. He never imagined he'd have the chance to join such an important meeting. But in the face of Isabella's determination, he couldn't refuse. And that was the moment his life began to change. The next day, Tom Mitchell stood in front of the strategic meeting room door at Titan AI, his heart full of anxiety. He had cleaned the floors of this room before, but he never imagined he would be standing before the senior executives and engineers of the company. Although he had no experience attending important meetings today, Isabella had insisted that he be there. Jason Marlowe arrived earlier, standing in the corner of the room, his back straight, and his demeanor still that of a leader who held all the answers. Tom could feel the challenge in Jason's gaze, the proud chief engineer who never allowed anyone to surpass him. In Jason's eyes, Tom was just a janitor. Never in all his years working here had Jason thought that Tom could stand on equal footing with him in a meeting like this. When Tom entered the room, Isabella Reynolds's gaze was no longer cold. She nodded, inviting him to sit in an empty chair. But as soon as her eyes swept across the room, her attention landed on one person. Jason Marlowe, the chief engineer, was still sitting there, his face full of displeasure. "Jason, I want you to clarify what happened with the model last night. Everything is problematic, and we don't have time to start over," Isabella said, her voice firm. Jason didn't answer immediately. He looked at Tom, then back at Isabella, trying to keep his composure. "We've tried many approaches, but we can't apply any of them effectively. It's not easy to change a model built on a proven foundation." "Are you saying the company can't change its approach because we've been working on it for months?" Isabella said, her voice cold, her eyes never leaving Jason. Jason fell silent. He knew this wasn't a question that needed an answer. The truth was, his methods were failing, and Tom, who had never been formally trained in technology, had solved the issue they were struggling with. Jason couldn't accept that. It felt like a slap to his pride. "Our company can change everything except what's been proven," Jason said, his voice dripping with derision. Tom doesn't understand the process." Tom felt a wave of warmth rush through him. He wasn't an expert, but he knew what he did was right. He looked at Jason, his eyes not fearful, not challenging, just calm. "It's easy to criticize when you're not willing to try new things," Tom said, his voice steady. The silence in the room grew heavy. All eyes turned to Jason, and some people began to notice the shift in Tom's attitude. He was no longer just a janitor. He had his own strength, a power no one had recognized before. People no longer saw him as an outsider. Jason tried to hold his ground, but inside, anger was rising. He couldn't bear the thought that someone with no credentials, no status, could stand beside him in this company. The two men locked eyes in a tense silence. Isabella felt the change in the atmosphere. She stood up, walked over to the whiteboard, and began rewriting the models Tom had altered. She asked questions, her eyes glancing at Tom, then turning back to the team. "We'll test this model again with Tom's changes," Isabella said, her voice resolute. "We will not miss this opportunity." Jason felt as though he had been humiliated in front of everyone in the room. He had helped build this company, yet now he had to watch as a janitor, a man with no reputation in the industry, changed everything. He couldn't believe he was in this situation. Still, he had no other choice. Under Isabella's direction, Jason and the engineering team began running the new test with Tom's adjustments. The results were undeniable. The system began to run more smoothly, errors reduced significantly. The data no longer had glitches, and the algorithm became more stable. Jason couldn't help but be surprised by the results. Despite his efforts to maintain his position, he couldn't deny that Tom's adjustments had made the system work more efficiently. He was forced to face the truth. Tom Mitchell, the man he had once dismissed as nothing more than a janitor, was the one who had saved the company from a major failure. Then, in front of the entire meeting room, Jason did something he never thought he would do. He stood up, pulled the chair out, and walked toward Tom. His gaze no longer held challenge or envy, but genuine respect. "Thank you, Tom," Jason said, his voice serious. You were right. I was wrong. Tom looked into Jason's eyes, no hostility in his own, just calm. Thank you for listening, Tom replied. This was a turning point in the story. Jason, who had once looked down on and disregarded Tom, now had to acknowledge his abilities. Isabella, though cold and demanding, couldn't deny that Tom had saved the project. And although Jason's opposition didn't easily fade from that moment on, the relationship between Tom and Jason began to change significantly. From adversaries, they would now become teammates, working together to take Titan AI to new heights. The next day, Tom walked into Titan AI's office, his steps steady, but his heart full of unease. He had attended the strategic meeting the day before and presented his ideas, but something still felt off. The change in how people viewed him was clear, but could this change be permanent? Isabella, the CEO of the company, no longer saw him the same way. She no longer looked at him with coldness and distance. Instead, her gaze frequently found him during meetings, and sometimes she would smile subtly when he offered new ideas. For Tom, this was a new and intriguing experience. He didn't know how to feel about someone like Isabella placing her trust in him. One late afternoon, as everyone was busy preparing for the next meeting, Jason approached Tom. He still felt a bit awkward about what had happened the day before, but he also realized that a change in his approach to work was necessary. He couldn't keep clinging to outdated ways. Tom, Jason began, his tone serious but no longer condescending. I just wanted to say you did well yesterday. I think we could collaborate better, don't you think? Tom was slightly surprised but nodded. Thank you, Jason. I think we can all learn from each other. Jason gave a brief smile, one that reflected change. Then let's continue working together. I think the team needs a fresh perspective. Tom sensed the shift in Jason's tone and attitude. He was no longer the one trying to shut him out. Instead, it seemed like they were going to collaborate, helping the company achieve better results. After meeting with Jason, Tom felt a part of the anxiety within him lift. He wasn't someone who liked to draw attention to himself, nor did he want to disrupt the working environment. But when he looked at Isabella, she had changed. No longer did her gaze carry the chill of detachment. It seemed she had opened up to him more. A few days later, when an important meeting about a new project was scheduled, Isabella unexpectedly invited Tom to join as an official strategic consultant. This time, there wasn't just a seat for him, it was a crucial one placed closest to her. Everyone in the room was surprised to see Tom enter, but soon they realized that Tom Mitchell was no longer just the janitor. Tom felt a bit nervous, but Isabella kept her eyes on him, her gaze encouraging. She didn't speak, but she looked at him with such determination, as if silently telling him, "Prove that you can do it." Isabella wasn't someone who easily admitted her mistakes, but for Tom, she had learned an important lesson. True value doesn't come from one's name or position, but from how a person acts and how they can help solve problems. One late evening after the meeting, when everyone had left, Isabella stood alone in her office staring out the window. The city shone brightly beneath the yellow streetlights, but she felt an odd sense of emptiness. Tom unexpectedly walked into the room holding a cup of coffee, as was his usual habit. Gone were the days when he was just the janitor. Now he came as a friend, a true colleague. "What's wrong?" Tom asked, his voice gentle but full of concern. Isabella turned surprised to see him standing there. She took a deep breath, paused for a moment before answering. "It's just, sometimes I feel lost. This project, it could change everything, but I can't do it alone." Tom was silent for a moment, then placed the coffee cup on the table. "I don't think we have to do it alone. Let me help. If you need a partner, I'll be that person." By chance, on a beautiful weekend day, Emily, Tom's daughter, and Isabella met at a cafe near the park. Isabella was sitting alone enjoying her coffee while watching the children play in the park. Suddenly, she saw a little girl running toward her hair, flowing in the wind, face beaming with a smile. It was Emily. Emily sat down in the chair across from Isabella, her innocent eyes gazing at her. "You're Isabella, right?" the little girl asked, her voice clear and sweet. Isabella nodded slightly, surprised that a child knew her name. "I'm Isabella. You must be Emily." Emily smiled and nodded. "I'm Tom's daughter. My dad really likes working at your company." Isabella smiled softly. She looked into Emily's bright eyes and unexpectedly felt a warm feeling rise in her heart. It was the first time she felt truly connected to someone beyond work. "I've never met you before, but your dad talks a lot about you," Isabella replied, her voice gentle. Emily looked at her with pure innocence. "I like to draw, and I want you to be friends with my dad, because he's a good man." Isabella was taken aback by the sincere words of a child. She felt a shift, something very different, beginning to form within her. The relationship between Tom and Isabella, though slow, was steadily growing. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They had become true friends. And with Emily, the little girl had taught Isabella an important lesson about the purity of love and family. On the evenings after work, Isabella and Tom would often sit down and talk. Gradually, they began to share not only work-related difficulties and pressures, but also stories about their personal lives. Those moments, though simple, were filled with emotion, and they made Isabella realize that not everything in life could be measured by numbers or spreadsheets. Some things were far more important, like sincerity, sacrifice, and the connections between people. A week after the strategic meeting, the company was rushing to finalize the last adjustments before officially launching the new AI product. All eyes were on Tom Mitchell, the man no one in the company ever thought could change the game. He wasn't a technology expert, but Tom had solved the complex problem that the entire engineering team, including Jason Marlowe, had failed to fix. Isabella had appointed Tom to be part of the project deployment team. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, but inside her, there was still an inexplicable feeling of unease. This project wasn't just crucial for the company. It was pivotal to her career. She could feel the pressure, the tension radiating from her colleagues and investors. They were all waiting for a big breakthrough, and Titan AI could not afford to fail. Tom, too, couldn't escape the feeling of tension. Every time he faced the complex control panels or tackled problems within the project, he thought of Emily. His daughter was his biggest motivation, the reason he stood up and fought to change his life. But Emily was also the reason he felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. He didn't want to fail not just for himself, but because she needed him. "Dad, I believe in you," Emily would often say each morning as he took her to school. That was all Tom needed to keep going, even though he didn't know what the future would bring. On that day, during an important meeting with investors, when everything seemed almost finalized, Isabella suddenly realized something surprising. Tom had unintentionally discovered a flaw in the way the company's machine learning system was functioning. A small error, but one that could have a significant impact on the product's performance. Everyone fell silent when he presented his solution, an approach simple yet highly effective, which took Isabella by surprise. "Thank you, Tom," Isabella said, her voice no longer cold but filled with genuine appreciation. "You've helped us again." Tom smiled, not feeling smug. He had just solved a small problem, but Isabella's gratitude made him feel like he truly had a place in the company. Right after the meeting, Isabella found Tom in a corner of the room. She looked at him with a gaze full of emotion, a stark contrast to how she had been in their earlier meetings. "Tom, I want to talk about something important," Isabella said, her tone low. "I know you haven't just helped us with work. You've changed the way I see things, changed the way I see myself." Tom was surprised, not fully understanding her words. "Thank you, Isabella, but I'm just doing what needs to be done." Isabella was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "I don't think I've said everything I need to say to you. I really feel something I haven't recognized in a long time." Tom looked into her eyes, silent, standing still, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. The emotions they hadn't shared seemed to be overflowing now. A few nights later, when everything seemed to have been sorted, Isabella and Tom sat together drinking coffee at a small cafe near the park where they could be undisturbed. She didn't hesitate to look at Tom and speak the words she had been thinking about for some time. "Tom, I'm not someone who easily admits this, but I've found something very important in what we've done together. Thank you for helping me see things more clearly." Tom didn't know what to say. He had always thought of himself as just a janitor in the company, but now he felt he had real value. He wasn't the best when it came to technology, but he was the one who had helped Isabella see what mattered most in life. He smiled and simply said, "Thank you, Isabella, but I think everything happened because we worked together. Yes, a week later, on an unscheduled evening, when the company had finished the final preparations for the product launch event, Isabella and Tom sat together in her office. The lights from the lamps in the room illuminated their faces, but in Isabella's eyes that light seemed to radiate from within. "Tom," Isabella said, her voice full of emotion, "I've thought a lot about what's happened between us. Not just the work, but everything you've done for me and for Emily. I've never felt this way, and I can't keep living in that loneliness anymore." Tom looked at her, his eyes full of surprise and doubt. "What are you saying?" "Tom," Isabella said, her voice lowering, "I've lived in a world where I couldn't feel love, but you've changed that. You've made me see everything differently. I don't just want you as a colleague. I want you to be a part of my life." Suddenly, she stepped closer, pulling out a small box from her handbag. She opened it, revealing a simple but meaningful ring inside. "I want you to be the one to share this life with me, Tom. And I want to ask you, will you do this?" Tom looked at her, his eyes shining with emotion, unable to speak. Finally, he simply nodded, feeling the sincere affection from Isabella. Isabella's proposal, though simple, was filled with emotion, like the conclusion to a long journey full of challenges and pain for both of them. From the initial conflicts, they had worked together, learned, grown, and understood the true value of love and empathy. The story ended in the warm light of a promising evening, where Tom and Isabella stood together, ready to face new challenges, not only in their work, but also in their lives together, building a bright future. 2 months after the proposal, Tom Mitchell and Isabella Reynolds were officially a couple, but their story didn't stop with a shift in their personal relationship. Titan AI had become a leader in the AI industry, and the breakthroughs in the projects that Tom and Isabella had worked on together had garnered the company attention from major partners and investors. Tom was no longer just a regular janitor at the company. He had officially become a senior strategic advisor, participating in important meetings and making strategic decisions alongside Isabella. Despite Tom not having a degree or prior fame, what he brought to the company was undeniable. He had helped solve problems that seemed unsolvable, and his simple yet profound way of thinking had changed the course of things. Isabella felt a distinct change within herself. She was no longer the cold, work-obsessed woman she once was. She began to spend time with Tom and Emily. The little girl she had come to feel was part of her family. They shared dinners, went for walks, and told each other stories about their lives. Emily often drew them cute pictures, and Isabella couldn't help but feel warmed each time she saw the little artworks from the young girl. However, their relationship wasn't always smooth sailing. Jason Marlowe, Titan AI's chief engineer, had changed his attitude toward Tom, but the jealousy and conflict still lingered. Jason couldn't easily accept the fact that Tom, someone with no formal qualifications, was now involved in making important decisions for the company. Though he no longer openly opposed Tom, there were still moments when his glances and words carried a coldness. One late afternoon, as Tom was working in his office, Jason appeared. He walked in without knocking his face cold and offering no signs of friendliness. "Tom," Jason began, his voice devoid of warmth, "I think we need to talk about your involvement in the strategic meetings. After all, Titan AI isn't a place for anyone to do things based on personal preference." Tom looked up from his computer screen, not surprised. He had grown accustomed to Jason's attitude. "I'm not doing things based on my own preferences, Jason. I'm just doing what's best for the company." Jason took a deep breath and continued, "You might see yourself as part of this company, but don't forget, we're not here to experiment with unproven methods. You don't have a degree. You don't have a background." "Jason," Tom interrupted, his voice firm, "I don't need a degree to solve problems. I'm not the one changing this company. I'm just helping it become better. As for the rest, that's our business, not just mine." Jason didn't respond further. He silently walked out of the room, leaving Tom standing there with his thoughts. He knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face every challenge. The most important thing was Emily and Isabella. They were the driving force that kept him going, not just for work, but for his life. A month later, the company began to see positive signs from the AI project that Tom and Isabella were leading. The improved algorithms yielded impressive results, making investors feel confident about Titan AI's future. This not only helped the company solidify its position, but also earned Isabella and Tom recognition from the industry. At a dinner party for key partners and investors, Isabella stood beside Tom, her gaze never leaving him. Together they received praise, but no one knew that between them, their relationship had grown closer than ever. Tom was no longer just a colleague. He was a friend, someone Isabella could rely on whenever work became difficult. Emily, now 7 years old, had witnessed many changes within her family. She no longer only cared about playing, but also took a keen interest in her father's work. "Dad," Emily asked one evening as they had dinner together, "when are you and Isabella going to get married?" Her question took Tom by surprise. He looked at Isabella, who smiled. "We'll talk about that later, Emily, okay?" Tom nodded, but inside he felt a special warmth. He realized that not only had Emily become a part of his life, but so had Isabella. A few days later, when the company held a meeting to discuss future plans, Jason Marlowe was the first to truly acknowledge Tom's abilities. He walked up to Tom, his eyes no longer filled with envy, but with recognition. "Tom, I think we can work together," Jason said, his tone much gentler than before. "Maybe I was wrong to think that only people with degrees could help the company grow. Thank you." Tom looked at Jason, smiled, but didn't say anything. He knew that things weren't over yet, but he had come a long way. One cold evening, as the dim streetlights cast their glow on Tom and Isabella's apartment, they sat together, hand in hand, in comfortable silence. There was little need for words. Just being with each other was enough. "Tom," Isabella said, her voice warm, "I think I found the most important thing in life. It's not the work, it's not the career, it's us." Tom looked into Isabella's eyes once again, feeling the love they had built together. "I think so too," Tom replied. "We've built something wonderful together, not just for the company, but for this life."